Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
You already know. You've known for a long time, actually, maybe years, maybe decades. There's this quiet whisper that follows you into the kitchen on Sunday mornings, sits beside you during holiday dinners, tucks itself into the silence after a phone call ends too quickly. It doesn't scream. It doesn't have to. It just waits. And somewhere between the passing of the mashed potatoes and the performance of laughter at someone's joke, you feel it again, that hollow thing, that specific kind of alone that only exists when you're surrounded by the people who are supposed to be your people. That's not loneliness. Loneliness is simple. What you feel is something far more complicated, far more wounding than that. What you feel is the grief of loving people who were never really there. Let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with it before you answer. When was the last time someone in your family, truly, genuinely, asked how you were doing and then waited for the real answer? Not the "I'm fine." Not the socially acceptable version of yourself you've learned to pack up and present like a neat little gift. But you. The you who worries at 3 a.m. The you who sometimes replays conversations from 15 years ago, still trying to understand what you did wrong. The you who gives and gives and gives and still somehow ends up feeling like a stranger at her own table. When was the last time someone wanted to meet that woman? If you're struggling to remember, that answer is telling you everything. There's a word that most people only apply to bad strangers or con artists. Fake. We say it about politicians, about social media, about cheap jewelry that turns your skin green. We rarely let ourselves say it about the people we share blood with. Because that feels too devastating, too final. Too much like admitting that the foundation we built our entire emotional life upon was sand. But here's what I've learned, both personally and in years of understanding how human beings wound each other in quiet, invisible ways. Fake doesn't always look the way we expect it to. A fake family member doesn't always lie to your face. They don't always steal from you or disappear without warning. Sometimes they show up every single Christmas. Sometimes they text you happy birthday right on time. Sometimes they hug you at funerals and say, "We need to see each other more." And then they go right back to never really seeing you at all. That's the particular cruelty of it, isn't it? The presence without the substance. The relationship shaped hole where an actual relationship was supposed to live. You didn't grow up dreaming of this. No little girl imagined someday, "I'll have a sister who only calls when she needs something." No young woman thinks, "I can't wait to spend the next 30 years shrinking myself so my mother doesn't feel uncomfortable around my success." No one signs up for this. And yet here, so many of us are, women in our 50s, 60s, 70s, still carrying the weight of family dynamics we never chose, still hoping that this conversation will be the one that finally cracks something open. That hope isn't weakness, by the way. I need you to hear that. The fact that you've kept hoping, that comes from the deepest, most tender part of who you are. You love them. You love them still, maybe. And that love is real and true in yours, even if what they gave back was mostly reflection, performance, or condition. But love, on its own, cannot make someone safe. And it cannot make someone real. Here's the thing about women our age that nobody talks about enough. We were raised, many of us, to be the sanctuary. To be the one who holds it together, smooths it over, forgives quickly, forgets quietly, and shows up again the next holiday with a casserole and a smile. We were taught that family is everything, that blood is sacred, that a good woman keeps the peace. And so we did, for years. Decades. We kept the peace so faithfully that we slowly, silently lost our own. And somewhere along the way, maybe during a sleepless night, maybe during a therapy session, maybe in a parking lot after a family gathering where you sat in your car and cried before you trusted yourself to drive, you started asking a question that changes everything. What if it wasn't me? That question is where healing begins. And that's exactly where we're going together. What if it wasn't me? Sit with that for just another moment, because most of us blow right past it. We ask it once in a vulnerable flash of clarity, and then we talk ourselves right back out of it. We think, no, I must have done something. I must have been too sensitive, too needy. Too much, not enough. We are so well trained in self-blame that we can find fault with ourselves in our sleep. But I want to gently, firmly, take that old story out of your hands today. Not to replace it with anger. Anger has its place, but it's not where we're going just yet. I want to replace it with something quieter and far more powerful. The truth. Here's a truth that took me a long time to fully absorb. Some people in families are assigned roles before they're old enough to speak. Before they can walk, before they have words, the family system is already deciding who they will be allowed to be. There's the golden child who can do no wrong. There's the scapegoat who absorbs the blame like a sponge so everyone else can feel clean. There's the invisible one, competent, reliable, never quite celebrated, who learns early that her job is to function, not to feel. And then there's the caretaker, the nurturer, the one who senses tension in a room before anyone else and quietly moves to neutralize it. The one who calls to check in. Who remembers everyone's birthday, everyone's doctor appointment, everyone's heartbreak. Who makes herself into a bridge so everyone else can walk across. Does any part of that feel familiar? If you're nodding right now, I want you to understand something. That role wasn't a compliment. It was an assignment. And you took it on because you were kind, because you were capable, because some part of you believed that if you just loved them well enough, they would finally love you back the way you needed. That's not weakness. That's a child's logic living inside a grown woman's body, and it makes complete, heartbreaking sense. Let's talk about what a fake family actually looks like from the inside. Because from the outside, everything can appear perfectly normal. The photos look fine, the holidays happen, the group chat exists, somebody shares a meme, somebody else reacts with a little heart. But underneath that surface, underneath the performance of family, there are unspoken truths that everyone has silently agreed never to say out loud. Things like, we don't actually support each other here. We compete, we compare, we keep score. Things like certain feelings are allowed and certain feelings are not. Joy is fine as long as it's not bigger than mine. Pain is acceptable as long as it doesn't inconvenience anyone. Things like love here is conditional. It arrives when you behave correctly and withdraws coldly the moment you don't. You weren't imagining it. You weren't being dramatic. That temperature drop you felt when you said the wrong thing at the table, that wasn't in your head. The way certain family members triangulate, gossiping to one person about another, never saying anything directly to your face. That's a real pattern with a real name. The way your accomplishments were minimized, redirected, or simply ignored while someone else's were celebrated, that happened. That was real. And you spent years maybe wondering if you were the problem for noticing. There's something particularly painful that happens to women in families like these, and I don't think we talk about it enough. It's the intermittent kindness, because a fake family member isn't cold all the time. If they were, you'd have left long ago. No. What makes this so disorienting, so crazy making, is that sometimes they're wonderful. Sometimes your mother says exactly the right thing, and you feel, for a shining moment, like the daughter she always wanted. Sometimes your sibling shows up for you in a real way, and you think, see, I knew they loved me. Maybe I've been too hard on them. And then the familiar coldness returns. The dismissal, the subtle put down, the favor with a string attached. The apology that somehow, in the construction of it, becomes your fault. Psychologists have a name for this pattern. It's called intermittent reinforcement. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most powerful bonding mechanisms that exists, not because it feels good, but because the unpredictability of it keeps you endlessly, exhaustingly hopeful. You keep reaching for the warmth. Because you felt it before. Because you know it's in there somewhere. Because this time might be different. That hope, that reaching, it isn't pathetic. It is profoundly human. But it is also quietly keeping you stuck. I want to ask you something else now. And I want you to answer honestly, not out loud, just in that private space behind your eyes where the real you lives. How much of your energy, over the years, has gone toward managing other people's emotions in your family, calculating before you speak, bracing for reactions, editing yourself, choosing the safer version of a story to tell because the true version would cause a scene or start a silence or end with you being called selfish for having feelings at all? How many years of you went into keeping everyone else comfortable? And here's the follow-up, the one that really matters. Who was doing that for you? If the answer is no one, if you were the one giving the sanctuary, but never living inside one yourself, then what you've been carrying isn't just family stress. It's a grief that has no clean name. It's mourning a family you deserve but didn't receive, while still showing up for the one you got. That is an enormous weight. And most of the women I'm speaking to right now have been carrying it so long, they've forgotten it isn't supposed to be this heavy. It is not normal to dread phone calls from family members. It is not normal to feel worse about yourself after spending time with the people who love you. It is not normal to rehearse conversations before you have them, to brace for impact, to feel a specific kind of exhaustion after holidays that has nothing to do with the cooking. Normal, healthy family connection, even imperfect, even messy, should leave you feeling seen more often than invisible, held more often than managed, real more often than performed. If that's not what you've had, then what you've had is not what family is supposed to be. And the very first step toward something better, toward anything better, is letting yourself call it what it is. Not to destroy anyone, not to become bitter, not to cut everyone off tomorrow, just to stop pretending you don't feel what you feel, to stop betraying yourself in order to maintain a peace that was never really peaceful at all. There comes a moment, and if it hasn't come for you yet, it will, where you simply get tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes, not the tired that a vacation cures or a glass of wine softens, a bone-deep tired, a soul-level exhaustion that arrives one ordinary day, maybe during something as simple as folding laundry or driving home from yet another gathering that left you feeling like a ghost in your own life. And in that tired, something shifts, not dramatically, not like the movies, where there's a confrontation and tears, and someone finally says the thing that needed to be said and everyone hugs and heals. Real life almost never looks like that. In real life, the shift is quieter. It's a thought you can't unthink. A door inside yourself that swings open and refuses, finally, blessedly refuses, to close again. The thought sounds something like this: I can't keep doing this and also keep being myself. That's the reckoning. And it's terrifying. Because for most of us, for women especially, for women of our generation particularly, the idea of stepping back from family, of questioning it, of saying this isn't working and I won't pretend anymore, that feels like a moral failing. It feels like abandonment, like selfishness, like becoming someone cold and ungrateful who doesn't understand the value of what she has. We were handed a story very early. Family is everything. You don't give up on family. Blood is thicker than water. You'll regret it when they're gone. And those phrases, God, how they've been used against us. How many women have stayed in painful, diminishing family dynamics because of sentences like those? How many have silenced their own suffering with the reminder that at least I have family, as though the mere presence of relatives is supposed to be enough, regardless of how those relatives actually treat you? Here's what nobody said out loud, but what I'm going to say clearly right now. Presence is not love. Obligation is not love. Guilt is not love. And a family that only holds together because one person, usually you, is quietly absorbing all the dysfunction and asking for nothing in return, that's not a family. That's a system. And you were never a role in someone else's system. You were always a whole person. So what does the reckoning actually ask of us? It doesn't ask you to stop loving them. You probably can't, and honestly, you probably shouldn't try. Love isn't the problem here. The problem is what you've been doing with that love. How you've been contorting yourself around it, sacrificing yourself to it, using it as a reason to override your own instincts again and again. The reckoning asks something much harder than stopping love. It asks you to start telling yourself the truth. And the truth for many of us comes in layers. You don't get it all at once. First, maybe you admit quietly that certain relationships drain you. Then you admit that they've always drained you. Then you start to wonder why you kept going back. Then you start to see the pattern, the hope, the disappointment, the recovery, the hope again, and you recognize it for the cycle it is. And then, if you're brave enough, and I believe you are, because you're still here, still listening, still willing, you ask the most important question of all. What do I actually need? And have I ever let myself have it? Let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in these conversations. The grief. Because when you finally acknowledge that your family, or certain members of it, were never capable of giving you what you needed. There is grief there. Real, legitimate, profound grief. Not just for the relationship you don't have, but for the relationship you spent your whole life trying to build. For the version of your mother you needed her to be and she wasn't. For the sister who could have been your closest friend and instead became your most complicated wound. For the family dinners that could have been sanctuary and were instead performances. You grieve the fantasy first. The family you imagined, the connection you kept reaching for, the unconditional love that was always one more effort away. And then, and this is the part that hits differently, the part that tends to arrive a little later and a little quieter. You grieve for yourself. For the younger version of you who deserved better. Who was doing everything right and still came up short. Who was so busy being who everyone else needed her to be that she never quite got to discover who she actually was. That grief is not self-pity. I want to say that clearly because women our age, we're taught to be deeply suspicious of anything that looks like focusing on ourselves. But grieving a real loss is not wallowing. It is honoring. It is saying that mattered. I mattered. What happened to me was real, and it deserves to be felt rather than managed. Let yourself feel it. Not forever, not as a destination, but as a passage. You have to walk through grief to get to the other side of it. And the other side, I promise you, is worth the walk. Now, here's where the turning point lies. Right here in this uncomfortable, tender, wide open space. Because the reckoning isn't just about looking backward. It can't be only that, or it becomes a prison of a different kind. One where you're not trapped by the family anymore. You're trapped by the story of what they did to you. And you deserve more than trading one cage for another. The turning point asks you to look forward. And it starts with a question that might feel almost shockingly simple after everything we've just walked through together. Who do I want to be in the second half of my life? Not who do you want them to be. Not how do you want them to change. Those things may or may not happen, and tying your healing to someone else's growth is a recipe for staying exactly where you are. No, this question is entirely, radically, beautifully about you. Who do you want to be? What kind of relationships do you want surrounding you? Not just with family, with friends, with community, with the world. What does it feel like in your body when you're in the presence of someone who is genuinely safe? Can you remember that feeling? Can you find it somewhere in your life right now, even in small doses? Because here's what I know about women who've spent decades in fake family dynamics. They are almost always underneath all of it, extraordinary at love. The real kind. The patient paying attention, showing up kind, they've just been pouring it into vessels that couldn't hold it. And that capacity, that enormous, beautiful, hard, one capacity to love, it doesn't disappear when you stop pouring it in the wrong direction. It becomes available for something new. The turning point isn't a single dramatic decision. It's a quiet, daily, sometimes difficult practice of choosing yourself, of noticing when you're about to shrink and choosing not to, of recognizing the familiar pullback into old patterns and pausing, just pausing long enough to ask, is this what I actually want? Or is this just what I've always done? It's learning the difference between love and loyalty to a system that was never loyal to you. It's understanding that boundaries aren't walls you build to keep people out. They're the fences that define where your yard ends and someone else's begins. And you are allowed, at any age, to know where your property line is. It's realizing, sometimes with a shock, sometimes with a sob, sometimes with a laugh that surprises you in its freedom, that you are allowed to decide what family means to you now. Not what it meant to your mother. Not what the culture told you. Not what guilt insists, what you decide, at this age, with everything you know. With all the years you have ahead of you, you are still here. And that means it's still possible. I want to tell you something that I mean with every part of me. It is not too late. I know that might land strange, depending on where you are right now. Maybe you're in your 60s and you're thinking about decades already spent. Maybe you're looking back at years of holidays endured, phone calls dreaded, versions of yourself you abandoned in rooms full of people who should have cherished you. And there's a voice, I know this voice, it visits most of us, that whispers, what's the point now? The damage is done. This is just how it is. That voice is not wisdom. That voice is exhaustion wearing wisdom's clothes, and I need you to hear the difference. Because reclamation, the real kind, the kind that changes the actual texture of your daily life, doesn't require decades. It doesn't require youth. It doesn't even require the people who hurt you to change a single thing about themselves. It only requires you, exactly as you are. Right now, with every scar and every year and every hard-won truth you're carrying, that is enough. You are enough, and you always were. So what does reclamation actually look like? Not in theory, in the real, ordinary, Tuesday afternoon fabric of an actual life. It looks quieter than you might expect. It looks like not calling back immediately. Like sitting with the decision of whether you even want to call back at all, and letting that be a real question rather than an automatic reflex. It looks like going to the family gathering, or not going, and either way, making that choice from a place of genuine discernment rather than guilt. Because there's a difference, a significant difference, between choosing presence and being conscripted into it. One fills you even when it's imperfect. The other hollows you out dinner by dinner, year by year. It looks like noticing when someone says something that diminishes you. That little remark, that familiar sting. And instead of absorbing it quietly and replaying it at midnight, pausing and thinking, that's about them. That has always been about them. Not with bitterness. Just with clarity. The calm, unshakable clarity of a woman who finally knows where she ends and where someone else's damage begins. It looks like building, slowly and intentionally, what I call your chosen architecture. The people, the spaces, the rhythms that hold you the way your family of origin perhaps never could. Let's talk about chosen family for a moment, because I think it gets misunderstood. Chosen family doesn't mean you go looking for replacement parents or surrogate siblings. It's not about filling slots in some organizational chart of belonging. It's subtler and more organic than that. Chosen family is the friend who calls on a random Wednesday, not because she needs something, but because she was thinking about you and wanted to say so. It's the neighbor who remembers what you mentioned 6 months ago and asks about it. It's the book club, the walking group, the woman at church you keep meaning to have coffee with. The connections that feel, when you're inside them, like breathing. Easy, natural, reciprocal. Women our age sometimes resist this. We've been so conditioned to believe that real belonging only comes through blood that we treat these gentler connections as nice, but secondary. We downgrade them in our own minds. We say, oh, she's just a friend, as though friendship is a consolation prize rather than one of the most profound and nourishing bonds a human being can experience. But I want to offer you a reframe. One that might feel radical at first, and then, if you let it settle, might feel like something you always secretly knew. The people who consistently make you feel safe, seen, and real. Those people are your family, whatever their last name is, whatever their relation to you on paper. The biology is incidental. The experience of being loved is what counts. And you are allowed, fully, completely allowed, to reorganize your life around that truth. Now I want to speak directly to something that may have been sitting quietly in the back of your mind this entire time. What about forgiveness? Because someone, maybe many someones, told you that forgiveness is the destination. That healing isn't real healing until you've forgiven. That carrying hurt is a choice, and a bad one, and that truly evolved people let it go and move on. And maybe you've been trying. Maybe you've been forgiving and still waking up with that familiar weight on your chest and wondering what's wrong with you, why you can't quite get there, why the wound keeps breathing even when you've told it to be still. Here's what I want to offer, gently but clearly. Forgiveness is not a performance you give for someone else's comfort. It is not something you announce. It is not something you force. And it is absolutely, unequivocally not the same thing as pretending it didn't happen, allowing it to continue, or welcoming someone back into the interior of your life simply because enough time has passed. Real forgiveness, the kind that actually frees you, is a private, internal process of releasing someone from the debt you believed they owed you. Not because they deserve it, not because they apologized, not because the relationship is repaired, but because you deserve to stop carrying the weight of it. That can take time. It should take time. And it looks different from the outside than people expect. A forgiven person doesn't necessarily get more access to you. A forgiven situation doesn't necessarily get revisited and relitigated. Sometimes forgiveness looks, from the outside, exactly like distance. Because the most truthful thing you can do for both yourself